Hello, this is BugPowderDust and thank you once again for joining me for another World of Tanks video. Today we'll be covering a more advanced guide for World of Tanks. Hopefully you will have seen the Absolute Beginner's Guide which I did maybe a couple of months ago. If you haven't, I'll be linking that on the screen now for those of you who feel that you're just a beginner to World of Tanks. You probably want to watch that first because there'll be some topics that I will have covered in that video that I'm not going to cover in this video on the assumption that you probably know them. However, you may have been playing World of Tanks for a few weeks or a few months now. You've got the basics, you're happy with those, you know where everything is, you know which end of the tank has the strongest armour and where to point your gun, but you need to know more about the game mechanics and the more kind of subtle things in World of Tanks like angling your tank, hull down, sidescraping. Maybe you've heard of these expressions, you don't really know what they are. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to try and cover some of the more advanced features of World of Tanks and hopefully turn you into a better player. Now I'm no unicorn myself, but I've been playing World of Tanks for quite a long time now. Racked up almost 10,000 battles, and you know I think I know what I'm doing. I might not be the best player, but I think I've got the basics. So hopefully this video will be of some use to you. So on to first things first, and something that's overlooked an awful lot, which is the minimap. Yes, the minimap. The minimap is something that by default starts very small in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, and I kind of get the impression it's overlooked by an awful lot of players, especially those players who end up not, how can I put this delicately, not performing very well on the battle itself. The first thing you really need to do with a minimap is make it bigger. Now some of you don't know you can make it bigger, that's fair enough. You use the plus and the minus keys to increase the size of the minimap. Now I always have it pretty much around about here. You can make it even bigger, keep pressing plus. As you can see it goes pretty damn big. I mean obviously this is not much use because you can't see most of the screen including your own tank. However, I tend to have it around about here, so the minimap's really clear. The fact that enemies are red and the fact that every time a new tank is spotted it pings and it flashes on the map. It should make it nice and clear when new things appear on the minimap. Knowing what the minimap says in relation to your own situation, your team situation, does come with time, but you need to start using it and you know, just practicing reading the minimap, understanding if a flank has collapsed. Generally, as you get higher up through the tiers, you will get a better radio and you can see where your tanks are across all of the map. I know at lower tiers, so for instance if you look in the north of the map in A3, you'll see the Su-85, that's its last reported position. That is because my radio on this Matilda is not powerful enough to see the whole map because I'm right in the bottom right hand corner. So that's the minimap. The point I was making really is that the minimap can save your life and help turn you into a much better player with better situational awareness. There are many times when I've been tunnel visioned in, and because the minimap pinged and it kind of caught my attention, I've noticed that tank has kind of crept up behind me and I managed to deal with the situation. Of course there are times when I've just been tunnel visioned and I haven't noticed. But the minimap is there, so definitely use it, it's really important. Okay, so that's a fairly important part and a nice introduction to this video. The next thing we're going to talk about is really critical to the whole of your World of Tanks experience, especially if you're a tank destroyer, and that's around bushes, hiding in bushes, and also spotting, how spotting works. So I'm going to go into this in some detail. Okay, so here I am in a training room with a couple of friends, and I am in my tank looking through the binoculars and I'm parked behind a bush. Now you can see on the screen that I've got a little bit of bush foliage in front of me. Let me unpause the replay and you can see that normally I'd be hidden here. Now let me just pause it again. You can see how far back I am from the bush, but that's irrelevant at this point because I can see through the bush. That means if I fire my gun I can be spotted by Watlanka up there who is playing the enemy. He'll be able to see me if I fire. If you fire from behind a bush and you can still see through the bush, it means that your enemies can see through the bush as well. So if anybody is within view distance of you, they'll be able to spot you. As an example of this, Watlanka is behind a bush there, but he is not far enough back behind it. So when he fires, he'll get spotted, as you can see. Now let me just pause it. If he'd pulled back a little bit further, so he couldn't see through the bush and fired, it's a very high chance that we wouldn't have spotted him. But because he was next to the bush and he could see through the bush when he fired, we were able to spot him. So that's really important, and that's a reason why there's a lot of tears at, well, hang on, I'm behind a bush, you shouldn't be able to spot me because I fired, etc, etc. But what a lot of people don't realise is of this bush rule. If it's transparent and you can see through it, people can see you when you fire. Now there are exceptions to the rule. Generally, the bigger the tank, the bigger the gun, you are going to get spotted more easily. So if you are in, say, a tier 5, say an M4 Sherman, with a derp gun, that's a big gun, the chances are, even though you're a little bit way back behind the bush and you can't see through it and you fire, you may well get spotted. It's all highly situational dependent, but generally the bigger the gun, the bigger the tank, your camouflage is not going to work for you quite so much. So here's another important thing to note. You might think I'm behind a bush here and everything's good. I'm not going to get spotted. This is absolutely fine. Well, as you can see here, and again I'm going to pause, I spot Watlanka, but more importantly he spots me. Now I can know he spotted me because you saw the orange Sixth Sense light up, and I'll cover that later in the video. But I know that I've been spotted. Now why have I been spotted? Let me just go into free camera. You'll notice that from Watlanka's point of view, I'm not really behind this bush. He's a long way away, and I can't zoom out enough, but literally I'm above the bush. So he can see my turret above that bush, so that is not good cover. I'd need to be a lot nearer to the bush in order not to get spotted. So that's not great cover. So really, if I wanted to fire from behind the bush and get far enough back without being spotted, I'd need to find another bush, because if I get close to the bush, that means I wouldn't get spotted if I didn't fire. But as soon as I fire, I'm too close to the bush for it to cover me. So really this is not a great spot for me to be in order not to get spotted. It seems a lot to take in, but it does become clear. To further illustrate the point, here I am in my T43 and I've spotted an E25. If I fire, I'll get spotted by him because the bush is translucent, okay? But I've taken that risk. I've taken the risk of me being spotted because it's quite early on in the game and I reckon I can get away with it. I pull back. He wouldn't have spotted me if I'd fired that shot just then, but somebody else might have. So I'm kind of pulling back here and I'm just keeping a little bit back from the bush because I know I've been spotted, but after a few seconds that spotting wears off. So I'm kind of wiggling about. And I've obviously been spotted by somebody else who I haven't spotted, which means that they're through these trees somewhere. So I just need to keep moving basically. So I'm pretty sure I'm still spotted here, and now I move up, see if I can take a shot there, which I can't. And I think, there's an arty, I'll try and have him. Now, he's obviously seen me because he fired at me. And again, this is a position where I would be spotted. I'm sure he can see me because I'm not behind adequate cover. This cover, this grass and stuff, does not hide you. It has to be a proper bush. Grass is just merely kind of fluff, if you like. So really, it's a judgment about whether you know you're going to get spotted but you can deal with it. For instance, I fire here, I know I'm going to get spotted when I fire at the IS. But I'm backing off because I know that I've got the landscape there to cover me. It's not about necessarily staying hidden at all costs necessarily. It depends what vehicle you're in. For instance, with the TD, generally lightly armoured, you probably wouldn't want to get spotted. You probably would have pulled back in order to take the shot, and hopefully you would still be able to make the shot. So later on in the same game, this is a great example of somebody being spotted, but not spotted by me. He was spotted probably by one of the tank destroyers in the middle. Now, he backs up momentarily, and I can hit him. Now when I fire, I've got that tree in the way between me and the E25. There's no way that he would be able to see me, even if he had the view range, which I don't think he does. So here's a Black Prince. Now I'm going to pause this. Now the Black Prince now has been spotted either by myself or more likely the artillery in A4. If I fire now, that Black Prince is near enough to me to spot me himself. So let me just demonstrate this. At this point I'm backing up slightly. Now do you see what I did there? I backed up. So that bush has now gone solid, it's not transparent. If I fire now at the Black Prince, the chances are he won't spot me because I've got the bush now to cover my muzzle flash and the smoke from my gun. And that's exactly what I do. Now he hasn't spotted me because he doesn't fire at me. He's got obviously RT to fire at as well, but I'm a big threat to him, probably a bigger threat than the artillery at this point in time. You'll notice now he's become despotted, so the chances are it was me who spotted him to start off with. It seems that the artillery in A4 is down in the dip. So what I need to do, I need to light up that Black Prince again in order for the artillery to fire at him. So that's what I do. Sure enough, there he is. And again, I back up, make the bush turn solid, take another shot. As soon as he goes, I move forward, spot him for the artillery, back up, wait for the outline to appear, take a shot. Now I could have fired through those boxes, but that's a whole different story, which we'll get into a bit later on as well. But what I'm doing is I'm keeping him lit up. There we go. Now that last shot I took through the bushes. He would have spotted me, but it was all over by then, and I just wanted to finish him off. So I hope you understand the importance of bushes and how you avoid being spotted. Or if you know you're going to be spotted anyway by firing through a transparent bush, just make sure that you have an exit strategy. Or if you're heavily armoured, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you're hull down. Which leads me neatly onto our next topic. But just before we get into that, one final word on spotting. One thing I forgot to mention was that if your tank gets within 50 meters of another tank, an enemy tank, you will both be spotted to each other automatically. So for instance on two opposite sides of a building, which is within 50 meters of each other, even though you have no line of sight, you'll both be spotted directly. So that's another thing to bear in mind and to be very much aware of. Okay, so let's talk about armour, angling, hull down, etc. So we have two tanks here. We have a T5 Panzer III-4 and we have my Tier 7 Tiger. So what you're going to see here is me demonstrating that armour, flat armour with no slope on it. As you can see on the Tiger here, it has no sloping back away from the enemy. It's just a flat surface. See that? Well, alright, a very small amount of sloping, maybe 10 or 15 degrees. The point is that's for intents and purposes flat. The sides are flat, as you can see, and the back is flat as well. So effectively it's like a brick. Now, in World of Tanks, one of the things you really need to do and learn to do and do automatically is angle your tank. So if you're facing the enemy, the angle you want to be at is kind of like this. If we were the enemy looking at the tank, you want to angle your armour like kind of like this, 30 to 45 degrees. It does vary slightly from tank to tank. So if somebody's firing at you, you're using physics to try and help you here by making sure that the shell doesn't hit a flat surface like this at 90 degrees, but it hits at a kind of a slight angle, or a 45-degree angle maybe, and it bounces off. So an example here is the Panzer III-4 will fire at me, and you can see he's hit a weak spot and it's gone in. Okay, so I've taken damage from that shot. Now his tank is 2 tiers lower than me and his gun isn't brilliant, but the point is that my armour directly on like that is not great. So what I need to do, I need to angle my armour. So what I'm doing here is I'm angling my armour, as previously mentioned, and now the 3-4 is going to take another shot at me. And this time it bounces. Let me just pause that there. And you'll see that the shot hit just below my gun mantlet, but the point is it bounced. It's a strong piece of armour anyway, but the point is that you know, by angling your armour, you're helping that shot bounce. Now in a Tiger especially, it's really important to angle your armour because, as I said, you've got lots of flat surfaces and stuff isn't going to bounce so much. Now it's not a guaranteed bounce if you angle, okay, it really does depend on the situation, the tank you're facing, what their penetration is on their gun, etc, etc. But it's usually very effective. Another thing to mention, of course, is that if you do have a kind of a low-powered gun, or you're maybe fighting a tank 2 tiers above you, it's always good to aim for weak spots. Now on this tank, the weak spots are the obvious parts of the tank here, and this is the same with most tanks. You've got the machine gun port there on the left, you've got the driver observation port here on the right, and you've got the commander hatch, which is the kind of big lumpy thing on top of the turret. So to demonstrate this, the Panzer is going to shoot my weak spot. So he's hit my turret, it didn't go through, but he's now going to take a shot at the driver hatch. Now, as you can see, the shot goes through, and because it's the driver's hatch, it makes sense that a shot that goes through there would also kill the driver, which it has done, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner. And that's obviously means that I have to use up a medkit to repair the driver, or suffer the consequences of the driver not being in action, so the tank would slow down. Which, depending on the tank, is either a big deal or it's not. So really, it's a good idea to aim for weak spots if you can. As a rule of thumb, some tanks doesn't matter so much. The lightly armoured tanks, some medium tanks, most tank destroyers are lightly armoured in comparison to other tanks of their tier. So maybe weak spots aren't so important, but certainly if you're up against a tank which you know is a bit tough, you need to fire at the weak spots, which is what I just mentioned, and especially more so if they're angled. Don't forget, of course, you can also just shoot at the tracks. So if they're angled at you and you're having trouble penetrating, shoot the tracks of the tank. If you detract the tank, you will then get experience points for any damage caused to that tank by other people on your team because you tracked the tank in the first place. So that's certainly a really good option for you if you have maybe an underpowered tank and you're having trouble getting frustrated. Shoot the tracks all day long, every day of the week. Even if they've already been tracked by you, putting more shots into the tracks means that they stay off for longer. It's not a case of once they've been tracked, any damage to those tracks is negated. It's not. It just resets the repair timer. So keep shooting them in the tracks. It's the most frustrating thing. They'll lose their cool. It helps your team. You get experience points. Everybody wins. So that's a really important thing to mention. So let's talk about hull down. Hull down is when you put your tank in a position where only its turret is showing. So you can fire out at the enemy and all they can see and hit on your tank is the turret. This is a really good tactic and was used in real life. This is not just a World of Tanks thing, because tanks' turrets are generally much better armoured and angled than the hull of the tank. So as a result, in World of Tanks, this is a really good tactic. If you can use the landscape to your effect, if you get into a good hull down position, and this is especially true on hills and things like that, where if you get good gun depression as well, you can really go to town. So here an example. So what Lanko in his T29 has gone down into a depression here, and if he was coming up towards me, I'd have a very hard time hitting him. So what I've done there as an example is I've basically fired at his weak spot on his tank, his commander hatch, and you see that I did damage. But other than that, I don't have much of his tank to fire at. Because we're so close, taking a shot like that is actually quite easy, but all I can see of his tank really is just his turret. So if I take another shot, if I was a bit further away and my Tiger wasn't so accurate, and a lot of tanks aren't, it's going to bounce, bounce, bounce. Meanwhile, he has all the time in the world to just take his shots leisurely at the whole of my tank, should he want to do that. Of course, it's all rock, paper, scissors in this game. You can sit there and be hull down all you like, but you've got artillery to worry about. And you've got people with accurate guns, like I just did, shooting at your weak spots, which is the commander's cupola, in a hull down position. The other thing to mention here is about gun depression. Because when you're coming up over a hill, you're only exposing your turret, and that's great. But if you can't bring your gun down far enough to fire at somebody on top of the hill, then doing that is kind of pointless, because all you're doing is you're just exposing the rest of your tank coming up over the hill, and then until you get your gun down in order to fire at them. So in this game, basically most American tanks, a lot of American tanks, have excellent gun depression and really good turret armour. So when you see American tanks on the field, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're taking them on where there's a hill involved. Either if they're on top of the hill shooting down on you, all you'll be able to see is their turret. Or if you're on the bottom of the hill going up, again, all you'll be able to see is a turret. Their gun depression will really cause you problems. So that's something else to bear in mind as well. I'll give you another example of hull down now in a tank destroyer with good armour. So here we have the excellent Jagdtiger 88, premium German tier 8 tank destroyer. I love this tank. Now, the good thing about this tank is that it's really, really well armoured on the top half of the tank. So the sloped armour going back towards the gun, and also the flat part that the gun is attached to and coming out of, that is all heavily armoured, very heavily armoured. The only weak spots on this tank from the front, really, are the lower front plate, that's the bit that slopes backwards towards the ground, and the machine gun turret, just there on the left, the kind of the dome. So really the idea with this tank is to get it into a hull down position, which is exactly what I'm doing here. You can see here that I'm in a superb hull down position, and although I can be spotted, there's only one artillery on the game, so I'm not too worried about that right at this point in time. But as you can see, let me just pause it, I've got my lower front plate covered from any enemies who might want to fire at me. So I still have that weak spot, my machine gun port. Let me just play it on a bit. What I've done is I'm just moving myself in a slightly better position where my gun is literally the only thing poking over the top there. I'm being a little bit twitchy here from artillery, but also, so let me just demonstrate this now. So as I move around, I'm going to switch into, so I can see that I haven't got quite the right spot that I want, but I've taken a bounce. So let me just pause. And you can see here that all I'm showing effectively is my gun. Now anybody firing at me is going to hit my very, very strong gun mantlet, or the front plate. Even though it's at 90 degrees, it's still really, really hard to penetrate, especially where I'm top tier, which is where I am at tier 8 here. Now, it's not ideal because they can still hit my weak spot, my gun port, so ideally this rubble would be better if it's facing, sorry, not facing, if it was aligned the other way. But you know what, you can't choose everything. So you can see how effective this spot is. So I've taken a bounce there. Meantime, I'm laying down the fire. This has got a really good rate of fire on this tank. So again, another bounce. And again, I'm just kind of moving around just so artillery doesn't hit me. So again, take a hit, and it bounces. Meanwhile, I'm laying down all that damage, another bounce, to these guys who have to expose their whole tank to me while I'm hull down, sitting pretty, and it's not a problem. So this is a great example of a hull down position. Again, bouncing. How many shots have I bounced now? 6, 7 maybe? And these guys just cannot penetrate me. If this was a tier 9 game, I would be a little bit more careful, because I think my frontal arm is about 200, 210, and tier 9 tanks can penetrate it frontally, so I'd be a little bit more cautious. But at this level, I'm not so concerned, as you can see. So let's move on to another important part of armour, and that is what's called sidescraping. Now, sidescraping is basically something that is not natural when you start to play World of Tanks. You play peekaboo round a corner, and you go out, you expose the front of your tank. Okay, it's angled, but you move out frontwards, you point your gun, you fire, you move back again. But all that's doing is presenting the front of your tank, including your tracks, which if you get blown off, you're then stuck out with the front of your tank exposed, and that can cause you big problems. So sidescraping is a really important part of the game. Now, I'll demonstrate that later on in this same game, so let me just skip to that now. Right, so in front you'll see there is a player in an IS-6. Now, an IS-6 already has quite good armour, but he's smart. He obviously knows what he's doing, and he is sidescraping. Now, what that means basically is he's got the front of his tank pointing towards the cover, so he's not exposing the lower front plate, which is generally a weak spot on a tank. And he's coming out slightly backwards while pointing his gun. Can you see what he's doing? Now, that presents a very shallow angle for my shell to hit and to penetrate, and it's going to bounce off, which my first shot did, as you can see. So I'm trying to go for his track now instead. But again, well, I think my shot, I don't know where my shot went, but the point is it didn't do any damage to him. So again, he's side-scraping, and my shot bounces. Now, IS-6 have got great side armour, so he could do that all day long, and I would never penetrate him. At best, I'd blow his tracks off. So that's a really good spot. That is side-scraping. I'll show you another example on another map. Before we come on to more side-scraping, I just want to give you another example of a very good hull-down position. This is probably your worst nightmare if you're in a T7 game versus a T29 like this. He is in a perfect position here. If you were crossing an open ground, all you can see is his turret, and he's going to be spitting out 390 damage on average to you every 8 or 9 seconds. All you can do is fire at his tank, his turret. And basically what that means is you have to aim for that little commander hatch to have any hope of doing any damage to him whatsoever while he's sitting pretty there, and as I said, he's got your whole tank to shoot at. So this is how powerful hull down can be. Right, on to more side scraping. Okay, so here we are in Malinovka. I'm in a M46 pattern, and what Lanka is in the T29 again. You'll see, although the T29 doesn't have great side armour, what he's doing here is he's side scraping, which means if I shoot him, at best I can take his tracks off. Penetrating him is going to be really difficult, whereas he can shoot at me, and if he comes back a little bit further, he can shoot at me, again I can take his tracks, and he can damage me. So let me just pause that. He can hit the outside of my tank there, the outer edge of my tank. So he's in a strong position, he's doing damage to me, whereas I'm just hitting the side of his tank, maybe taking his tracks off. Now obviously in this situation I'd move, I'd try and get around him, etc., but I'm just demonstrating this really about how effective side scraping can be. I could also probably shoot just under his turret here and try and go for his turret ring, maybe his tracks here, but really at the end of the day it's just this area that I can hit, maybe keep him tracked, etc. So you can see side scraping is actually really powerful. Certainly something to bear in mind, especially if your tank has really good side armour. So something like the E100 KV4 ST1, STI, however you pronounce it. Those are excellent tanks in city where there's lots of buildings, you can't really get around them very easily. Side scraping, absolutely fantastic tactic. In something like the pattern, you could probably get away with it, but the armour's not great on the pattern, and a lot of other tanks for that matter with lightly armoured sides, so it's kind of try it and see how it works out for you. Okay, moving on. We've covered bushes and spotting and armour, angling, side scraping, which I think are probably two of the most important parts of World of Tanks. Basically, how to keep yourself concealed, and if you are spotted, how to try and keep yourself alive for a lot longer, and also how to damage and penetrate enemy tanks. So let's cover some of the other stuff. I think one of the most important skills to have on your crew is Sixth Sense, arguably the most important. What Sixth Sense does is it tells you when you've been spotted, 3 seconds after you've been spotted. So as an example, let me show you this. So we're going up a ridge here in Type 59s, and although this is obviously pretty obvious that I've been spotted, so you'll see that the orange bulb icon appeared. Now, in this situation it's not that useful, but in a situation where maybe you're the last tank left on the map and you're casting around trying to find somebody, they have a good chance of killing you, your light goes off, you know that you're in the right area. Or for instance, if you're a tank destroyer, getting spotted, or a scout for that matter, getting spotted means that you've probably got a shell coming your way in the next second or two. So having that skill is really important. So that's something you can work towards. It's a commander skill, and you unlock it when you get to 100% on that skill or perk. So it's a really important one to get, I feel anyway. Okay, so let's talk about mods. Now, mods are modifications to the game client that could well make your life easier when you play World of Tanks. I would say the majority of the player base, certainly the more experienced players, have a modification or two installed. Now you'll notice that my screen seems a lot more informational, if that's a word, it is now, than the vanilla client. So for instance, in the left hand and right hand sides, there's a lot of colours going on compared to what you'd get in the normal client. Now I've got two mods installed. I've got one which is Aslane's Contour mod, and I'll put links to these in the video description. And what that does is it basically colour codes the types of tanks with their names. So for instance, on the left hand side you've got Tiger P, Tiger, Comet, T-43, etc. from the top. It colours heavy tanks as being kind of that pinky red colour, the medium tanks as being yellow, TDs as blue, and SPGs or RT as purple. Now I've used this mod, and light tanks as green. Now I've used this mod for a really long time, and those colours are second nature to me now, and I find it really useful. But your mileage may vary. Now Aslane's mod does a few other things, but to be honest I only really use it for the colour coding there, which I found really useful over and above the kind of vanilla client, which doesn't really give you that kind of same at a glance information, at least for me anyway. Now the most important thing, which to be honest, take it or leave it, is XVM. I'm sure you've probably heard of XVM. If you haven't, what XVM does is it gives you an idea of what the players on your team and the opposing team are like. So it shows up their stats. So on the left hand side, I'll kind of go through it very quickly. People are colour coded based on their WN8 efficiency. Now that is made up of a very complicated algorithm, but basically means the more you do in a game, the more damage you do, the more spotting, how involved you are with the game gets you a good WN8 rating. Again, I don't know how it's worked out. There is complicated algorithms and calculations and whatnot which are on the internet for you to see. If you want to Google that, that's great. Now the people's colour codings are based on the WN8, that's their name colour coding, that is. So for instance, if you look at mine on the left, you've got BugPowderDust. I've got a WN8 rating of 1583, which makes me a kind of light green. As people get better, they become a proper green, so the player 2 beneath me, Plexic, is 1741, he's like a nice darker green. Then you get purple, lighter blue, then purple. And that is an indicator of how, see this is where it gets quite controversial, an indicator of how good a player is. But even good players have off days, and even bad players have good days. Now as you go down the list you get kind of orange, yellow and red. And this is where the expression tomato has come from. It's not very nice, but in a team game, a highly kind of charged team game, people can be quite unforgiving on their less skilled members of the team. So bottom left hand corner for instance, you've got a few red players who have played a few thousand games, and this is something else I'll describe. So the other stats there. So again, if we look at mine, BugPowderDust, I've played 10k plus games. It's rounded down to the nearest 1,000. I've got a 55% win rate. In the current tank I'm in the Comet, I've played 18 games, and again this takes a bit longer to update, but I've got a 56% win rate in the Comet of those 18 games. So that gives you an idea of the stats of me and also the stats of the vehicle that I'm driving. The vehicle stats don't really mean a thing as far as I'm concerned, other than, oh look, he really likes this tank, he's played a lot of games in it. But generally it's the stats of the person that are more interesting to me, because a good player can make any tank work for them really. So what XVM does is it gives you an idea of how good your team is compared to how good the other team is, but it's only really a rough guide, and it's, as I said, very controversial. Some players swear by it, some players even turn on an XVM feature which is called win chance, and that gives you at the start of the game an idea of how much percentage chance you have of your team winning the game, like 56% or 60%. Now in my experience this has been kind of fairly accurate. If you've got a team with a 5% win chance, in more often than not you're going to lose, because obviously that's what that win chance percentage is. 5 games out of 100 you'd win, but 95 games out of 100 you'd lose, and that's what it's all about. However, it's not hard and fast, but what a lot of people have started doing is saying, oh my god, we've only got a 5% chance to win, I'm quitting, and then they go and drown themselves or they quit the client, which is dumb, quite frankly. So XVM has attracted a lot of criticism, and it seems to me that pretty much everyone's using XVM because everyone else is using XVM, and it's one of those things really. So take it or leave it. I have it on because it's of use to me, because if I've got maybe a choice of 2 targets and the 2 tanks are similar, I'll generally shoot the player who's better, because he's more of a threat to me and to the whole team. Artillery players use it I think for the same reason, but again it's kind of controversial. Take it or leave it. I find it quite useful, but I don't have the win percentage on. I used to, but it's too demoralising to be honest. I'd rather not know. But having the stats on is actually quite useful. So that's a modification that I would recommend. But again, try it. If you don't like it or feel it gives you too much information or you just don't get on with it, take it out again. It's not a problem. What it does do, it does some extra cool things, XVM, other than give you stats. It gives you some further information, like a log of the hits you've taken, and also where the last positions of certain tanks were. I'll demonstrate that now. So the game has progressed slightly, and you'll notice on the minimap it shows positions of, in the middle, in B6, a Tiger P, and an M7. So those are like the last reported positions of those tanks. Now again, this is controversial. People have decided, well actually that's too much information, it's not very skilled, and some people frown upon it. But it's there to be used, it's kind of part of the mod. Wargaming haven't banned it, so I'm assuming it's okay to use. I mean, for a long time I used to play without that, but when you're like the last maybe few tanks on your team, there's 1 tank left, it's kind of nice to have an indicator of where that tank is, so you can move in the correct direction and save a bit of time. But again, it's entirely up to you. It's just there to be used. I also use another mod which basically you can see in the bottom left hand corner tells me what has hit me, how much damage it's done, how much damage I've done to other tanks, but also, again controversially, it tells you what ammo is being fired at you, so whether someone's firing armour piercing or gold. I'm not particularly bothered what somebody fires at me. The fact I know that they're firing gold, other than oh they're firing gold, doesn't really help me a great deal, because I'm in a situation and I need to deal with that situation, whether they're firing armour piercing or gold. Generally, if I'm in a tougher tank like an E75 maybe or an E100, I'm expecting people to be firing gold at me, so it's not that big a deal. But some people use that as a way to identify people firing gold and then call them gold noobs or whatever. So again, be warned, I find the mod actually quite nice to use. I use it more of a damage panel than anything else. It's very nice. I like the formatting. It doesn't overcluster the screen, so I actually think it's quite good. Speaking of mods, I've actually done a video which explains how to install mods if you're not sure how to do that. I'll link that on screen now. Okay, so another thing I wanted to mention was the use of destructible cover, such as walls and buildings. Now before a couple of patches ago you could actually use this wall to hide behind. If I shot, all that would happen, my shot would go into the wall and the wall would absorb the shot and there'd be no damage to the tank whatsoever. But this was universally thought of as not being very good at all, because let's face it, although your penetration would kind of suffer slightly, the shot would still go through the wall and into the target. So Wargaming implemented this. So if I take a shot now, you can see there that what happens is the wall section has now disappeared, but he did some damage. And my penetration of my shot has decreased significantly, or maybe not so significantly. I don't think any figures were released, but at this range it's under 100 meters, it's 83 meters in fact. So the penetration of my shell is actually still pretty good. So I can maybe shoot through this brick pillar. Now if I take a second shot, it went in. So clearly brick pillars, these pillars are really good at slowing your shell down, whereas the brick walls aren't so much, as you demonstrate, as I showed you, sorry, as I demonstrated. So it's, if you can, shoot through a wall pillar, sorry, a wall, rather than the pillar itself, because the pillar conceivably is a stronger piece of scenery, whereas things like these barrels probably aren't, these fences, and certainly the washing is not going to do anything to your shot. So here we have two walls in the way. Let's see if that's going to go through. So it did. It went through two walls, but two walls slowed the penetration of the shot so much that it didn't actually go through, whereas if I fire now, that's going to go through. So that's just really something to bear in mind. You can use this scenery, but just bear in mind that firing through walls is going to slow your shot down and reduce the penetration. So if you have a low caliber gun like here at tier 5, firing through two walls may not be such a great idea. Let me try this again. Yeah. So it's not the two walls down, but it hasn't got enough penetration to go through the side of the tank there. So that's something to bear in mind. So that's pretty much it from me. I don't want to make this video too long, so I hope that's really been of use to you and that it's been quite clear. I hope I've explained it well enough. But look, if you have any questions, then please feel free to put them on the video, on the comments, sorry, and I will try and help out, or maybe someone else can help out. If I made any mistakes or got something wrong, please let me know. I don't claim to be the world's foremost expert at tanks, but I think I know pretty much most of the mechanics anyway. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like the video so I can get some feedback that way. If you don't want to leave a comment, that's great, and share with your friends. You know, if you think your friends who are at that kind of intermediate stage might appreciate the video, then please share it with them, and that'd be much appreciated from me as well. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you for your patience with the length of the video, and I'll catch you again next time. Stay safe out there.